The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning. My name is Jen Saunders. I'm a Senior Program Officer with the National Alliance to End Homelessness. I want to welcome you to our first webinar in a series designed for providers in California who operate or are interested in operating a rapid rehousing program. This webinar will focus primarily on the recently released rapid rehousing performance benchmarks and program standards. And Cynthia Najendra of the National Alliance to End Homelessness and Tom Albanese of Abt Associates will largely be presenting these. Mark Worley of Abt Associates will also be assisting with questions. Just a few logistics for the webinar. It will run about an hour and a half. All lines will be on mute, but we will have a question and answer period following the presentations. You can send us questions at any time during the webinar. You should have a question box on the right side in the panel. The webinar is being recorded and will be posted on our website, endhomelessness.org, following the webinar. And as I mentioned, this is the first webinar in a series. We'll include registration links at the end of the registration for each of the subsequent webinars. The second webinar will focus on housing identification, the first core component of rapid rehousing, and will be held on May 25th at 11 a.m. The third webinar will focus on rent and move-in assistance. It will be held on Thursday, June 9th at 11 a.m. And the final webinar will focus on rapid rehousing case management. That will be held on June 23rd at 11 a.m. So to begin, we are going to try to get a sense of the experience of the people on the line in terms of their knowledge of rapid rehousing. So we're going to put out a poll. We'll give you about 30 seconds to respond, and then we'll look at the results. Based on the results, it looks like 46% are operating a program for less than 2 years. About 20% are operating a program for 2 years or more. 10% are new grantees that are not yet operating programs, and about 8% are funders with some familiarity of rapid rehousing. Our second poll will ask you about what funding you receive for your rapid rehousing program. So we'll also give you about 30 seconds to respond. It looks like we're finding about 35% are funded through Calworks, about 20% through ESG, 5% have both Calworks and ESG, a quarter have COC, Calworks, and ESG, and 13% have other funding. On your screen, you'll see an agenda for what we'll be covering today. HUD, the California Department of Social Services, and the Department of Housing and Community Development will say a few words to introduce the webinar. And that's Tim Lawless from Department of Social Services, Cindy Kavanaugh, Department of Housing and Community Development, and Norm Suchar from the HUD SNAPS office. We will start with an introduction to the purpose, use, and process of development of rapid rehousing program benchmarks and program standards. And then we'll be diving into the standards themselves. Cynthia will provide a review of the core components of rapid rehousing. And for the remainder of the webinar, we'll provide overviews from each of the sections of the performance benchmarks and program standards, starting with the program philosophy and design standards, followed by program standards for each of the core components, and ending with a brief mention of the performance benchmarks. So now I will turn it over to Tim Lawless of the California Department of Social Services to give some comments.
Okay, well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. This is Tim Lawless with the California Department of Social Services. And for those of you that don't know, our department oversees the Calworks program, which is administered at the county level. And my team specifically works with counties implementing the Calworks Housing Support Program, or HSP, which is a rapid rehousing program that began in 2014. So generally, we hope everyone can take away some valuable information today regarding the rapid rehousing performance benchmarks and program standards. This webinar should serve as a great review of the core components of rapid rehousing, and we would certainly strongly encourage our HSP providers to take a look at their programs and evaluate areas that may be strengthened relative to the benchmarks that are being discussed today. So on behalf of CDSS, I would like to thank the National Alliance staff, as well as Abt Associates, for coordinating with both CDSS and our state partners over at the California Department of Housing and Community Development. We're really thankful for the technical assistance offered to our department and to our providers in order to help address homelessness in California. Finally, I know that there will be an opportunity for questions at the end of the webinar. But because there are both sort of HSP and ESG providers participating, we would ask that you sort of focus your questions on the rapid rehousing core components and benchmarks discussed. And to the extent that there are sort of program eligibility questions specific to HSP, please feel free to direct those to CDSS separately following today's webinar. So with that said, I'll turn it over to Cindy Kavanaugh with the Department of Housing and Community Development.
Good morning. Thank you, Tim. The Department of Housing and Community Development is also very pleased to co-sponsor and participate today in this first of the four-part webinar series on rapid rehousing. And I'd like to echo Tim's thanks today for today's expert panel and for the National Alliance and Abt Associates in partnering with the state. HCD administers the state's Emergency Solutions Grant Program, and in our recently redesigned program, we anticipate more providers in more areas of the state able to offer rapid rehousing assistance to help the families and individuals so that they can exit homelessness more quickly. Working with our funded providers and our continuum of care organizations and localities, the department supports the delivery of impactful programs that employ best practices and meet the national standards discussed in today's webinar. This work is really challenging, especially considering California's markets, and we applaud and thank you in the community for your efforts that support households to resolve their homelessness quickly and regain housing stability. We expect to release the state's NOFA on the balance of state allocation for the ESG funding for 2015 and 2016 funds next week. And if you have program-specific questions, as Tim mentioned, please direct them to us at esg@hcd.ca.gov, and that's esg@hcd.ca.gov. Thanks very much for your participation, and I will turn it over at this point to Norm Suchar at HUD.
Thank you very much, Cindy. And let me again echo everybody's thanks of the Alliance and Abt Associates and everyone for putting this together. It's really helpful to the field. It's helpful to the mission we're trying to accomplish. So I just sort of want to reiterate some of the things that have been said until now, especially the importance of rapid rehousing as a strategy moving forward. We just announced a set of awards for the Continuum of Care program where we essentially doubled the amount of funding available for rapid rehousing. So there was a significant shift in resources, and it's a shift we supported towards approaches like rapid rehousing. And so we're expecting that this year we're funding a lot of additional rapid rehousing capacity, and that we will continue to grow that capacity in the Continuum of Care program. So this is definitely, if you're thinking about a business model, this is a good business to be in. I also want to, though, say that as we've been looking at our rapid rehousing programs and the outcomes of the programs, it's also clear there is room for improvement in those rapid rehousing programs. The research we've looked at, including the family option study and some other research, is clearly showing us that there are a couple things we need to work on. Certainly lowering barriers to our rapid rehousing programs is really important. Making sure that the services and the assistance is really tailored to the individual needs of the people being served. Landlord engagement is always a challenging issue, particularly in the tighter housing markets, which is practically the entire state of California at this point. So those are all areas where we need to just continue working and improving. And I think there are just a lot of little things in the course of operating a rapid rehousing program that you need to do to achieve better outcomes, and especially to make the process move more quickly so people experiencing homelessness are doing so for as short a time as possible, and then when they exit, they have the supports they need to continue to be stable. So these standards and training opportunities like this are just so valuable and so important. So thank you everyone for participating in this. And so with that, I will turn things over to Cynthia. Cynthia?
Thank you, Norm. So before we start talking about rapid rehousing and the specifics of the standards and benchmarks themselves, we want to provide some background about the creation and development of the benchmarks and the standards. So in 2014, the United States Interagency Council on Homelessness, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, and the Department of Veterans Affairs agreed to the core components of rapid rehousing, which are housing identification, rent and move-in assistance, and rapid rehousing case management and services. The purpose of these core components is to clearly define the essential activities of a rapid rehousing program. However, the components do not really define what is considered to be a good rapid rehousing program. The purpose behind the standards is really to provide details on both what a rapid rehousing program should achieve and what the program's staffing, policy, and activities should be in order to be considered an effective program. And the benchmarks and standards document that we are presenting on today really provides benchmarks on the essential areas of performance and qualitative program standards for each of the rapid rehousing core components that are likely to help a program meet these performance benchmarks. The standards are also really intended to help standardize programs practice across all of the rapid rehousing programs in your community. Really, no matter how they are funded, rapid rehousing programs should essentially be functioning in a pretty similar way. There will be some slight differences in eligible costs and things like that, but essentially they should be operating in the standardized way to really be effective. The performance benchmarks are also based on what is currently considered promising practice at the National Alliance to End Homelessness, the VA, HUD, USICH, and Abt Associates, and other federal technical assistance providers. And the standards were also developed with a lot of input and feedback from nationally recognized high-performing rapid rehousing programs from all over the country and in various types of housing markets. So as rapid rehousing practice continues to evolve, these standards will really be updated. As the more we learn, we will sort of incorporate new tools, new thinking in the standards. And these are intended to be a living tool to help current and potential rapid rehousing providers, funders, stakeholders, really design and identify rapid rehousing programs that are or likely to be the most successful in ending homelessness for individuals and families. There have been rapid rehousing standards released by other agencies, and it's important to note that the former standards of the SSVF program and standards by CARF and COA are consistent with these standards, and they're not in conflict. So if you are a program that is looking at other standards, they should all pretty much be consistent. Since the standards developed don't have an accompanying accreditation process, we'll let you know how you can use these standards depending on what your role is in your community. So for those of you who are funders, it sounded like there were a few funders on the phone or state agencies, you can use the performance benchmarks and program standards to increase the effective implementation of rapid rehousing in communities, help evaluate those programs, and the standards can be used in the development for requests for proposals,
in contracts and for a variety of funding streams to set performance and outcome goals for programs. You can evaluate applications for new rapid rehousing programs and determine which organizations are really best suited to provide rapid rehousing, and you can review current program performance. Grantees can use these standards to design and implement effective rapid rehousing practice. Even if you are a program that's already been running for a few years, like it sounds like there's some folks on the phone who've had programs that have been running for over 2 years, the benchmarks can be used to still evaluate your performance and possible rapid rehousing partner agencies' performance that you're working with. These benchmarks and standards really provide clear goals and activities for the programs interested in improving their practice. COCs also can use these standards during the process of developing written standards. The COCs need to have written standards. So these can be used to help develop those standards and for how they plan to administer assistance through coordinated entry. And COCs sort of have to develop standards for providing assistance, including prioritizing who receives rapid rehousing, how much rent participants in a rapid rehousing program must pay. And while recommendations for these standards are as required by HUD are not included in this document, the standards can help inform their development. Next slide, please. Thank you. As I mentioned, the program standards are included for each of the core components of rapid rehousing in the document. So throughout the presentation and in the actual document, you're going to see that each program standard is denoted by a letter and a number. That letter corresponds to the core component of rapid rehousing that the standard is associated with. H is for housing identification, R is for rent and move-in assistance, and C is for case management and services. You'll also see that there is a fourth section that Tom is going to talk about that is denoted by a P, that is program philosophy, design, the program philosophy and design section. So today we're really detailing highlights of the program standards and some of the sort of an overview of the core components. But for a full list of the standards, you should really review the actual document. At the end of this webinar, there is a link to the document on our website, and you can download the full benchmarks and standards. Today's presentation in the standards document, you'll see that the standards are accompanied by principles and a rationale on which the standards are based. So each section will have that. And the document also includes examples of how a program may meet these standards. And before we get into the actual standards, I just want to provide a quick review of what rapid rehousing is, especially for newer programs that haven't started up yet, and present on the program philosophy and design standards as well. And to note that this is, again, a very broad overview, and the first, as we mentioned in the beginning of the webinar, this is the first in a series of webinars that will provide a deeper look into each component to help you strengthen your rapid rehousing practice.
We are going to launch a quick poll before we get into that content, so I will give you about 30 seconds to respond. What are your biggest challenges that you're facing in implementing effective rapid rehousing? And overwhelmingly, we're finding that 82% voted for a challenging housing market, 5 for lack of training on best practices, 2% for connecting households to services, and 11% for helping households to increase income.
Jen. So not surprisingly, we know California has an incredibly challenging housing market throughout the state. So we can certainly, we kind of expected that that would be what the results look like. And so what we're hoping is that, as you dive more into the core components of rapid rehousing and into these standards and into some of the other tools that we have and resources that we have on our website, that you will have some new strategies on how to really work in your challenging housing markets and really how to work with landlords a little bit better. So again, we just wanted to give a quick overview of rapid rehousing. Next slide, please. Rapid rehousing, as I said, has these 3 core components, and it's an intervention designed to help individuals and families to quickly exit homelessness. The quick part is really the critical part of rapid rehousing, to return to housing in the community and not to become homeless again in the near term. Rapid rehousing should be offered without preconditions, as Norm said, and the resources and services provided through rapid rehousing are tailored to the unique individuals of each household. It's really important that it's not just a package deal, that it's really about what each household needs and what their strengths are. The core components of rapid rehousing are housing identification, move-in and rent assistance, and rapid rehousing case management and services. And these core components represent the minimum that a program must be providing to households to really be considered a rapid rehousing program. So we know that there's sometimes programs that maybe just do rent and move-in assistance or have services but maybe don't have housing identification. So what we're trying to stress is that you have to really be offering all 3 of these, and it's not necessary that it is just all provided by one program. You can have partner agencies, but the household should be experiencing all 3 of these components to really be getting effective rapid rehousing services. The core components were developed in collaboration with and endorsed by USICH, HUD, VA, and while the household is not required to use all 3 components, they really need to be offered all of those 3 components. So that part is really key. So just a moment to talk about why rapid rehousing is important. And Norm kind of touched on this, so I'll just work through this really quickly. Communities around the country have transformed their response to homelessness through rapid rehousing, and that's why really communities are increasing their investment in rapid rehousing. We're seeing it really having very positive impacts on homelessness. The model increases the number of people communities are able to serve. It's a really cost-effective model. We can see from the Family Option Study that 5 families can be rapidly rehoused for what it costs to house 1 family via transitional housing. And so it's important to remember that you're really serving, you're able to serve more people and really have similar outcomes for those individuals and for those families. Rapid rehousing also reduces the overall number of people experiencing homelessness in the community, and it helps to exit homelessness, helps people to exit homelessness quickly to permanent housing and not to return to shelter. Rapid rehousing uses a housing-first approach because through rapid rehousing, people experiencing homelessness obtain permanent housing quickly without preconditions. And it's important to recognize throughout when you're thinking about how you're designing your program that housing first and rapid rehousing is based on the principle that people's survival and safety needs will really drive people's behavior and needs until these needs are met. And so fundamentally, it's difficult to focus on longer-term goals if people don't have housing. And housing serves as a platform for people to really be able to address other needs and higher needs. So that's why the housing, getting people into housing as quickly as possible is so important. Because the key to rapid rehousing is that it's rapid, it helps people end their homelessness as quickly as possible. This means that they're spending less time in shelters. This has the system impact of creating flow, that is, people move through shelter faster. So this frees up crisis beds for others in need, reduces and eliminates wait lists for shelter because people are moving through quickly. And the swiftness of moving households out of homelessness and into housing really reduces those negative long-term impacts of homelessness, which really improves household outcomes. It improves household outcomes, and we see that communities increasing rapid rehousing are showing decreases in overall homelessness numbers. Really quickly, this is the infographic that the Alliance developed to make rapid rehousing easy to explain and understand, kind of a 2-minute pitch on rapid rehousing. The core components of rapid rehousing help households find housing, help households pay for housing, and help households stay in housing. Housing identification is the first core component of rapid rehousing. And the goal is really to find housing for program participants quickly. Housing identification is really for program staff to recruit landlords with units in the communities and neighborhoods where program participants want to live and negotiate with landlords to help program participants access housing. The recruitment of landlords is essential to program participants and having rapid access to permanent housing from the moment they enter the program. So it's critical that staff serve the function of recruiting landlords and ideally have dedicated staff that are housing locators or housing specialists. And these housing locators have specialized skills in housing identification and landlord recruitment. And there's more about that in the standards. The partnerships with landlords that the program has developed really means that there are more opportunities for program participants to obtain housing as quickly as possible. And landlords experience the benefits of a partnership with the program. They often give preferences to program participants and may even be willing to occasionally consider some reductions in rent or waiving of security deposits when the program staff have a really positive and responsive relationship to the landlord. Without landlords creating concessions like this, a lot of program participants would be denied housing opportunities due to their income, housing, credit, criminal histories, and landlords are often willing to waive some of this because program staff are communicating with the landlord and helping the tenant really resolve some tenancy issues that might arise. Some programs will use the Rapid Rehousing Program's ability to give things like a double security deposit to persuade landlords to rent to tenants who may be extremely high risk. And the program needs to sort of be judicious about how they use those incentives. The program wants to be knowledgeable about landlord responsibilities to protect households served by the program as well. And beyond landlord recruitment, the programs must also match households to appropriate housing. Housing choice is really important, and housing should be something that's sustainable for the household, something that they can pay for after assistance ends, and that should be decent and safe and really meets the particular safety needs of people who are survivors of domestic violence, people who really want to experience certain kinds of safe neighborhoods. Effective programs accomplish this by providing a variety of housing options. So when it's possible, and we understand that there's a lot of challenging markets in California, but when possible, providing a variety of housing options in a variety of neighborhoods that offer resources to households during the housing search, location, and application process. And it's important that staff are identifying the housing, negotiating with the landlords, and really helping households. If a household chooses to search for units themselves, staff should really check in on their progress to see how they're doing, and if they're struggling, kind of try to step in when needed. Rent and move-in assistance is the second core component of rapid rehousing, the goal of which is to provide short-term help to households so they can pay for housing. Activities under this core component include paying for security deposits, move-in expenses, rent, and utilities. And it's important to remember that the intent of the rent and move-in assistance component is to enable the quick resolution of the immediate housing crisis, because the majority of rapid rehousing participants will be able to maintain housing even with short-term assistance. We're seeing that in research and community data all over the country. Programs should start out by assuming households, even those with zero income or other tenancy barriers, will succeed with a minimal subsidy and support rather than a longer subsidy, and then just extend when necessary. And households with higher housing barriers or no income may need assistance for different depths, longer durations, but such households should really be assisted in immediately attaining that permanent housing, and income and things like that should not be barriers to getting rapid rehousing assistance. And programs should be attentive to the ability of households to maintain that housing when subsidy ends, but not be sort of overly concerned with trying to reach a 30% rent burden, because that's pretty challenging to do in a standard that is not achieved by the majority of low-income and poor households. So instead, they should recognize that once housed, the rapid rehousing household will be much better positioned really to increase their income and address their needs. And just again, by not over-serving households, programs can maximize how many households they can serve. Rapid rehousing case management services is the third core component, and the goals of rapid rehousing case management is to really help participants obtain and move into permanent housing. those activities are very focused on housing. So where case management can sort of be thought of as having a wider scope, rapid rehousing case management is very specific, and it's very focused on obtaining and maintaining housing. And the case management is not to build a long-term services relationship, because rapid rehousing is a short-term crisis intervention. So because of that, case management really focuses on navigating barriers to tenancy and helping participants to build a support system in their community so that once assistance ends, they have that assistance and are able to kind of maintain on their own. I'm going to turn it over to Tom now to talk a little bit about program philosophy and design.
Great, thanks, Cynthia. Next slide, please. So as Cynthia mentioned, and as we've heard, there are a set of standards built around each of the core components. And apart from that, there are standards and principles that have been established for the overarching sort of program design and philosophy that are part of the document that Cynthia referenced, that we encourage everyone to review, that goes into all these areas in depth. And so this first area around program philosophy and design is really meant to provide programs, whether you're a planner, a funder, or a program manager, or direct service staff, a basic orientation to rapid rehousing as it applies to the program cutting across each of the three core components, and as you consider how to effectively operate a program in the context of a local system of care, a continuum of care. And so some of the basic principles that rapid rehousing programs should seek to adhere to. Number one is the idea that rapid rehousing is really designed to serve a broad swath of households with both few barriers and those with many barriers to obtaining housing. And so in designing and operating a rapid rehousing program, it's important to target as many households as possible, essentially those households who, without assistance, will remain homeless. And these are households who can't otherwise self-resolve or may not have another source of assistance to help them quickly exit their homelessness and enter housing in a stable way. Rapid rehousing also needs to be flexible. That is, programs that are most effective are designed in a way that there is not a standardized package of services that all households receive, and there's no variation from that, but rather assistance is individualized and provided in a way that if a household needs more assistance, the program is able to offer as much help, whether it's financial assistance or case management assistance or more intensive support identifying housing as the household may need. And so within the constraints of funding, programs should be designed to offer both the minimum amount upwards to the maximum amount possible. Thirdly, programs should be sure not to screen out households based on factors that may not have direct relevance to their ability to quickly obtain housing and stabilize in it with the right amount of support. It's important to use assessment tools, particularly those that utilize a scoring system, as a guide for triage and referral and admission decisions, but not necessarily an absolute parameter for those decisions. The most effective programs offer rapid rehousing to anyone who is not otherwise able to quickly exit homelessness on their own or with other assistance. And then fourthly, in rapid rehousing programs that are most effective, there's a strong emphasis on ensuring that participants, as they move into housing, have the same rights and responsibilities of a normal tenancy within permanent housing. There's not additional requirements that participants have to follow apart from what might be included in the standard lease agreement. This is true even in cases where a rapid rehousing program is master leasing units and subletting to a participant. Those leases should be standard leases and should not have additional conditions on them that aren't what one might experience in a normal rental unit. Next slide, please. So I want to talk about just a few of the standards that are within this section of the rapid rehousing standards and benchmarks. And we're not going to go through each and every standard. As Cynthia noted, there's much more to the standards than what we're going to go through today. We're just going to talk about and highlight a few standards within the broader array of standards, ones that perhaps are more relevant, but that we wanted to shine a light on and just touch on during this webinar. And I want to note as well that the standards are grouped into 3 different types of standards. There are standards for program staff, there are standards related to program policies, and there are standards related to program activities. So I want to start with just one example, an excerpt of a program staff standard relative to program philosophy and design. And this relates to ensuring that staff are trained on the principles of housing first and oriented to the basic program philosophy of rapid rehousing. And that programs have a standardized and routine way to onboard new staff that ensure that staff, as they're hired, as they're starting their work in the program, understand and are able to apply housing first and rapid rehousing practices in the most effective way possible. So the standard here reflects essentially that programs have a well thought out and standardized way for onboarding and training staff. And so in other words, an effective program will have this in place and can demonstrate this. Next slide, please. The second set of standards, again, is around program policies. And here, again, just 2 examples of standards in this section. The first is standard P3, and it relates to programs having a well-defined and a written screening process that uses a consistent and transparent decision-making criteria. And as important, those criteria don't include factors that screen out participants for lack of income or due to their income circumstances. In effect, being clear about your screening criteria, your eligibility criteria, and having those criteria be articulated and operationalized in a way that's consistent with the core principles of rapid rehousing is what this standard speaks to. Related to that, programs should have eligibility criteria within their written criteria that don't include or condition admission on participant or applicants being sober or having demonstrated a period of sobriety or demonstrating a commitment to participating in treatment or any other criteria that are designed to anticipate or predict success or whether a participant can obtain a long-term housing stability. Fundamentally, programs should just be looking at whether a participant wants the program and is interested in the services you have to offer and is willing to engage in those services, but doesn't necessarily commit to programs or assistance or behavioral change that doesn't relate to them attaining housing. Next slide, please. And then thirdly, within the section are program activities. And here again are just a few items that relate to overall program design and integration as part of a broader system of care. One standard, as you see here, standard P8, relates to participating in the community's local HMIF and collecting data in a standardized way that assures the data is complete and reliable for purposes of understanding not just who you're serving and being able to track that in a standardized way, but also to allow the community to understand who's being served in rapid rehousing and the impact of rapid rehousing on the overall experience of homelessness within in the community and towards the community goals. So there's an expectation that programs are actively participating in HMIS. The second standard, an example or excerpt here of a standard, relates to participation in the local coordinated entry system that the COC has established for people who are at risk or who are experiencing homelessness. And so rapid rehousing programs that are most effective are actively participating in those systems and accept referrals from coordinated entry in a way that makes sense both for the system and the program and ensures that those referrals and processes are efficient and effective. Now I'm going to hand it back to Cynthia, who's going to walk us through standards for the first two core components, starting with housing identification. Cynthia?
One thing I wanted to just reiterate is that while going back to that number of people that, 87% of people say that having challenges identifying housing, that's something that is particularly hard in California, but really something that is very common in so many communities across the country. And so while these standards are saying, okay, you need to do, a number of activities to really be doing housing identification well, and gives you some sense of how to do it well, I want to point out that there are a number of tools, webinars and resources from providers across the country, many from California, who talk about how they do this well, how they actually strategize around engaging landlords. And when we sent these program standards out to get feedback from providers, a lot of them came from places in California with really tough housing markets, Alameda County, LA, San Francisco, and I think that, and Sacramento, and there's places that are just really doing amazing work, even though it's extremely challenging. This is some of the hardest work I think that a program does. It's we kind of are really learning that the strategies from providers are working to identify housing in really tough markets. And I think that if you want to learn more, it's certainly helpful to actually talk to providers in your community who might already be doing this. So the principles of each section, I think Tom kind of mentioned this, but the principles, sort of are to help you guide the way you think about standards and how you implement them. And we've touched on this a little bit, but the housing identification principles are really sort of focused on thinking about, within the limits of a participant's income, sort of how programs help households access units that are desirable and sustainable for them. That can be sometimes a difficult conversation with households who may want someplace that is bigger than they can afford or in a certain kind of neighborhood, but you do want to sort of help provide options for households so that they can sustain that house. And housing identification efforts should be designed to actively recruit and retain landlords so that when a program participant enters the program, there's already sort of a pipeline of units. You're not necessarily waiting for a participant to sit in your office and then you sort of go look for a unit. Hopefully you have an active list of landlords who have been renting to you for a while. If you're a newer program, you're going to have to build those relationships, of course. And over time, you will find that landlords, if you're a program that is kind of responsive to their needs, will continue to send you units, especially landlords in your community that might own many buildings. We also find that it's sometimes smaller mom-and-pop landlords that are kind of a good group of people to target at first, but there will be, larger communities that have more property management companies that may be willing to work with you. If you kind of just let, one or two units at first, and if that works out well, they may start sending you more units. And again, the landlord is really a vital partner in all of this. Rapid rehousing programs should sort of think about having two clients, one being the household and one being the landlord, and being responsive to the landlord to preserve and develop those partnerships for future housing placements is a pretty important activity. One of the sample standards in housing identification under program staffing has to do with something I mentioned earlier, which is that program staff are designating this responsibility to identifying and recruiting landlords to someone who really has these skills, and encouraging landlords to rent to these households served by the program despite their high barriers. And I think when you're a new rapid rehousing program, that seems really unlikely that landlords are going to rent to people who have a lack of income or many evictions or criminal history, but programs have proven all over the country that with really specialized staff who are really knowledgeable about landlord perspectives, really understand landlords' needs, understand landlord, tenant rights and responsibilities, that they're really able to negotiate with landlords to help help households work through these kinds of screening barriers. And having dedicated staff for whom this is the primary responsibility seems to be very effective, rather than giving this to case managers who also have kind of a number of other duties. So giving this to a primary staff person who has a background in property, in real estate, in property management, it can be really, really effective in this particular activity. I think there was one slide that we just skipped up. Thank you. Again, another sample standard from program policies. Rapid rehousing programs should offer a standard basic level of support to all landlords who lease to program participants, and programs can negotiate additional supports as needed on a case-by-case basis. And so I'll talk about that in a second. But at a minimum, programs should be responding quickly to landlords, whether that's your housing locator or your case manager. The important part is responding quickly when the landlord calls with an issue, and really try to do that within one business day. The program staff are seeking to resolve conflicts. Now, the program staff aren't there to solve every conflict, but whatever is really something that has to do with the lease and the tenancy agreement, that's where program staff can be really helpful at mediating conflicts. And really, and no, this is a last resort, but whenever possible, if the unit really isn't working and the match between the landlord and the household is just not going to be something that is going to work long term, it's best to try to negotiate the move-out terms for the household. So one, you are preserving your relationship with the landlord and saying to the landlord, look, we have another household that can move in. You don't have to worry about a vacancy. You're not going to lose any money. You don't have to recruit a new household. And you also avoid an eviction for the household. So it's important to be engaged with the landlord and with the household to sort of prevent any of the negative impacts of an eviction. Rent and move-in assistance, again, is a second core component. And again, the goal is to provide short-term help to households so they can pay for housing. Next slide, please. And because you're really, as a program, trying to enable the quick resolution of the housing crisis, it's important to remember that it's really about tailoring this financial assistance to the household. The majority of rapid rehousing participants are going to be able to maintain housing with short-term assistance. I think that's something that programs learn over time. It can be something that sort of surprises programs. They didn't think maybe that certain households would be able to make it, and it can be sort of concerning at first. But if you're a new household, a new program, it's helpful to look at the data of most rapid rehousing participants and see that they're able to maintain their housing with short to medium term assistance. And programs should sort of start out by assuming households, as I said earlier, even with very low income or no income, are going to be okay with a short amount of subsidy rather than a longer subsidy. And so you want to be able, as a program, to be individualized and flexible and respond to whatever the changing needs of the household are. Maybe the household comes in with an income or with a job, and somewhere along the line, 2 or 3 months in, one person loses their job, and so you might want to flex up a little bit more for a couple of months to help that household. Or they attain income, and now you can sort of start flexing down. And that sort of flexibility is really key, rather than just saying to a household, you have 6 months of assistance or you have 3 months of assistance and that's it. It sort of is helpful to also motivate both program staff and households to kind of really achieve those goals of self-sufficiency as quickly as possible. Next slide, please. program staff should really make efforts to maximize the number of households they're able to serve, as we've said a few times now, so I'll just skip this quickly. But again, the progressive manner that where you're giving assistance only as much as the household really needs at that time helps you really maximize the amount of resources you have to serve more families. Next slide, please. This is a standard in the program staff section that again sort of speaks to this progressive approach. And the progressive approach is to determine the duration and amount of rent assistance. This is something that communities and programs have a lot of questions about. How do we know how much to give, how long to give? And that's really something that sort of program staff have to figure out, use, and really figure out what a household needs. And look at their unique strengths, their resources, and figure out, kind of come from a strengths-based place and see what the strengths of a household are and what they can afford. A lot of households will come in feeling like they can't afford anything, and I think it's the staff's role to really help the household see that they have strengths, that they really can sustain themselves with a certain amount of assistance, and try to help them figure out how to do that through budgeting and short-term goals and things like that that really help them see from week to week and month to month how they're going to be able to succeed. This is a standard in the program activity section, and rapid rehousing is meant to help households kind of overcome this hurdle of moving into housing. And moving into housing can be really costly, and so the financial assistance should try to cover basic housing costs, which might mean certainly rental deposits and first and last month's rent, temporary rent assistance, and the program should provide, when needed or through formal agreement, financial assistance for other types of housing costs, such as utility assistance or back rent or things like that. It kind of depends on your funding, but you want to think about what are those hurdles that the household really needs to be able to get into housing, and how can we help with those. And households will also need move-in assistance. So these standards are about helping the program participants meet those basic needs at move-in that most households are going to need. Some households will put their things in storage, but some might not have any furniture. So helping them secure basic furnishings for an apartment, that might mean mattresses, basic kitchen items, utensils, are really sometimes the thing that is going to really help them move into housing. I think that can be very intimidating for households sometimes, thinking about how are they going to get all those things. It doesn't necessarily mean that the program is providing funding for that, though sometimes that is allowable. This is a situation where using your community donations, using people in your community and businesses in your community to donate some of these things can also be kind of a way to provide these resources. Tom is now going to talk about case management and services standards.
Thanks, Cynthia. As noted, this is the third component of rapid rehousing, and similar to the other components, case management is really meant to be individualized and flexible and designed in a way that meets the individual participants' needs. As you see on the next slide, there are really three types of rapid rehousing case management and services that are represented in the standards and the core components. Of course, helping participants obtain and move into permanent housing. This goes hand in hand with the housing identification work, and oftentimes is a function of case management or perhaps specialized housing placement services. Helping participants stabilize in housing as a core function, and making sure that participants understand the expectations and requirements of their lease and how to maintain their unit, and where to find help in the neighborhood should they need it, where to access transportation, find the local grocery store, find the local food pantry, and just get settled into their housing is another function. And then lastly, closing the case, which is not just a simple activity in many situations. It involves some thoughtful planning with participants to understand, again, how they might continue to manage their housing without the support of the program, where they might turn should they need help with rent again or fall behind on their bills, which surely many families who will continue to struggle economically will need to know those resources and how best to access them. So closing the case is another central function of case management, and you'll see the standards speak to those activities. So some of the principles for case management and services you see here, obviously services should be client-driven and voluntary. This is true and consistent with the overall design and philosophy of rapid rehousing. Case management should, of course, be flexible in intensity, offering only essential services until or unless a participant demonstrates and wants more help than is needed. And I should say that effective rapid rehousing programs know when to step up case management and engagement when it looks like a household is at risk of running afoul of their lease or falling behind on rent or having other difficulties that might result in a risk to their housing. So the best programs know when to not just step up that assistance, but at times make sure that participants are connected to case managers who have the right experience and skills and ability to engage participants who may have more challenges versus participants who need less intensive supports. Rapid rehousing case management is also a based model that seeks to empower clients by helping them with problem solving and working through issues. That doesn't simply do things for clients, but helps them work out issues in a way that is lasting and helps participants understand how to do that for themselves and with as little external support as necessary. And lastly, rapid housing case management is really meant to be short-term in nature. A principle that's often mentioned is providing just enough assistance to help a household quickly obtain housing, stabilize in it, and have some degree of confidence that they're not going to have a near-term recurrence of the same housing crisis that brought them into homelessness. That's the fundamental job of rapid rehousing. And so to accomplish that and to have confidence that we're leaving families and individuals in a stable place more often than not also means that we are looking at their connection to the community, what resources are available in the community, making sure they know how to navigate those resources and can readily access them when need be. And so they have that increased resiliency in the event that there's a future crisis. So some of the standards we want to just touch on briefly related to program staffing. It's important that case managers have clearly articulated and housing-specific job descriptions that assure that case managers understand their focus is on housing and that their job is to use a strengths-based approach to help participants meet their individual needs. Additionally, programs that have specialized staff who conduct housing location and placement search and perhaps are the interface with landlords, there's a clear way to ensure close coordination amongst those, with those staff and case management staff to assure that there's seamless coordination both with regard to assisting participants and to ensuring that landlord needs are met in the event that there are issues. Next slide, please. With regard to program policies, here again a few example standards we wanted to highlight. it's important that unless there are limitations placed on the program by a funder, that program participants are the ones determining when, where, and how often case management occurs, that they are the driver of the services that are provided, and that programs are respectful of participant wishes with regard to the type, level, and duration of assistance that is made available. And related to that, meetings should, as is feasible, occur in the participant's home, in their own setting where they're comfortable and able to engage a case manager. And don't force participants to go to locations that might not be easy to get to, or that might be difficult to do in the midst of trying to deal with other personal matters. Related to that, programs should have a clearly defined policies and standards for when case management should end and when it might need to continue. These guidelines should be flexible. We have found in many communities, many programs, that without clear guidelines for staff to follow, oftentimes clients can stay in programs much longer than they need to or want to in some instances, and beyond the purpose of the program. So programs should have clear written guidelines for when it's appropriate to start having that conversation with clients around, should we start to think about exiting you from the program? What might that look like? And can we do that in a way that assures that you have some degree of confidence that you can maintain your housing when we leave? Oftentimes these guidelines and criteria are centered around indicators that look specifically at whether or not a person has the means and the ability to maintain their housing, and don't look at factors or don't place as much weight anyway on factors beyond simply the ability to maintain housing should the participant be exited from the program. And so now we want to, those are the standards and some of the principles related to the core components, as well as program philosophy and design. And at this point, we want to turn our attention to the performance benchmarks. As was mentioned earlier, there are both standards and benchmarks for rapid rehousing that reflect best practice programs. And so here we're really getting to the why portion of the standards. Why should you do all of the things we've just discussed and more within the full body of the standards? And the answer is simple. We do these things within programs not just so we can say we do them, but so we can have high-performing programs that make a difference for individuals and families that are served, as well as the communities where our programs operate. So let's turn for a moment to what we mean by high performance in rapid rehousing. It's important to remember that rapid rehousing is a housing-first intervention. The central goal of rapid rehousing is to address and quickly resolve the housing crisis of people assisted. Programs shouldn't be screening out households that are assumed to not or are predicted to not be potentially successful in the program. Shouldn't be screening out households who lack income or employment or have a significant criminal history or might have difficulty with their mental health or physical problems, or perhaps have substance use issues or don't demonstrate motivation. Rapid rehousing is really meant to be broadly targeted, and that's really core to all the different practices of rapid rehousing. Also, one of the expectations of rapid rehousing, and this was discussed a bit earlier, is that rapid rehousing programs are participating in the local HMIS, which gives programs the ability then to measure their effectiveness, not just in terms of how long participants are just in that program and exit to permanent housing, but also how long participants are homeless when they get rapid rehousing assistance, and are they homeless for a short period of time and do they return? So let me just quickly touch on the basic goals and benchmarks that are included here on the next slide for rapid rehousing. There are 3 primary goals of rapid rehousing. Number 1, reduce the length of time participants spend homeless. Secondly, ensure that participants exit to permanent housing. And thirdly, limit the returns to homelessness within a year of program exit. Rapid rehousing is a short-term intervention, as Cynthia noted, and so therefore it's not expected that people who are assisted to resolve their homeless crisis with rapid rehousing assistance are suddenly no longer going to be poor or later in their lives experience housing instability, but we do want to ensure that people are homeless for as short as time as possible. They have successful outcomes relative to resolving their homeless crisis, and they don't immediately return, at least within a year of program exit, that participants are placed in and help to stabilize in housing that they can maintain for the foreseeable future. There are some specific targets within the rapid rehousing standards and benchmarks related to each of these measures. We're not going to focus on those today. We do invite folks to look at those targets. They're based on what high-performing programs that adhere to these standards that we just talked through have achieved in all sorts of communities around the country, including high-cost communities. So as you start to look more closely at these types of these 3 goals, these measures, and then consider the performance targets that have been identified for each, remember that if you adhere to these standards and really strive to be an effective best practice programs, it is achievable that you as a program can achieve this type of performance. So lastly, just as a reminder, your community, your program may not yet be ready to set a performance target relative to reducing the time folks are homeless and their housing outcomes and their return rates. But it's important to start to measure that. And as you start to do that, you may find that you need to set alternative performance goals so you can compare your program with like programs in the community, but that push programs to continually do better and achieve higher performance. And continue to examine how you're doing as you seek to achieve these benchmarks and challenge yourself to be a best practice program. So with that, we're going to turn it back to Jen, who's going to guide us through some questions, and Marge will be joining us now as well to help answer those.
Thank you, Tom. So we have received a few questions, and please again submit yours in the comment box, and we have a few minutes. Given the challenges that many communities are facing with housing markets, some of the questions have asked about what incentives you could suggest to get landlords on board. I don't know if Cynthia wants to start or others.
Sure, and yeah, please jump in, Marge and Tom as well. But it really kind of depends on what your funding is, what you're allowed to do. But there's some basic things that you can do as a program to incentivize landlords and help them sort of see the value of having a rapid rehousing program be the sort of negotiator or the middleman, basically. Because most tenants that landlords are working with don't come with the kind of support a rapid rehousing program comes with. The rapid rehousing program is providing staff support to landlords to deal with all kinds of things, to help with tenancy issues. So some sort of, and it helps to understand what landlords want. Landlords want, the rent to be paid on time, for their tenants to be good neighbors to the other tenants. They want their property to be protected and not damaged. And they don't want vacancies, because vacancies cost landlords a lot of money in non-rent payments and in recruiting new households for vacancy, to fill that vacancy. So as much as the program can really speak to and be responsive to those needs of the landlord, the landlord can kind of see that the program provides a bunch of things that a lot of other tenants don't come with. And it's important to remember that tenants, yes, you're working in challenging housing markets, so there's going to be some tenants that have really good records and income and rental histories, but your program staff are just a huge asset in working through all these sort of tenancy barriers and building these relationships with landlords. And we've seen many, many programs sort of develop these landlord partnerships that help landlords see the benefits of the program. If you have a particularly risky household, that the landlord will see as risky because of their tenancy barriers, such as maybe a criminal history that is long or a lack of income. Things like double security deposits can be helpful. You don't want to sort of give those out to everybody, but you want to be judicious about those. But double security deposits can be helpful in situations like that, and kind of saying to the landlord, look, we have a pipeline of households too that we can that we will be able to send you if you have continued vacancies, which can make a landlord's life much easier. Marge, I'm sure you have some other things that you probably want to add.
Yeah, I guess I'd like to reinforce the financial benefits to landlords. If you asked one of your landlords to calculate how much money they lose whenever they have an eviction in their properties, first of all, they have to go to court. In some states, there's a lot of process involved with that, and while that process is going on, oftentimes the tenant is not paying any rent at all. Finally, when the tenant leaves, there's an empty unit and they have to advertise again. They have to probably clean up the damage because evicted people tend not to leave their apartments sparkling clean. And then they have to screen and interview and so forth. So it can cost a landlord $8,000 in lost revenue and actual time, staff time spent if they lose a tenant to eviction. Now, one of the things a rapid rehousing program can do is say, if we cannot work out a solution to whatever tenancy problems you're having with our client, we will help that person relocate. That way they won't have an eviction on their record and you won't have to go through that process. And not only that, but we will send you another referral to fill that vacancy. In essence, not only have you saved that landlord the $8,000 that they would have spent on an eviction, but you can, if you have a regular supply of folks to refer, you can almost guarantee that landlord 100% occupancy of the units that you are working with. And I talked recently with a landlord who has only 7 units. She rents every single one of them to rapid rehousing single adults, because, and she says that she has never had a vacancy because the rapid rehousing staff are so good at filling the units, supporting the tenant, and moving them out if they have to, which is very rare. So I would reinforce that with landlords.
And I just want to add 2 other very quick thoughts, and these are, I would say, emerging strategies. Folks may have seen that there was just a webinar that USICH hosted on risk mitigation funds. These are, and they're called various things, but essentially it's a pool of funding that programs can make available to landlords as a way to guarantee that, should a unit get destroyed or damaged beyond the security deposit, that they'll cover those costs. And that has served as a financial incentive for many landlords in a lot of communities as a way to mitigate their risk. And then secondly, I've heard some programs that, they have staff who do some of the light repairs and cleanup and prep of the unit as a way to, essentially save the landlord some of that cost and hassle of turnover or preparation. So I've heard that as another incentive.
And I guess I wouldn't discount the fact that landlords, like anybody else, kind of like to be doing good deeds. And the landlord partners that I have talked with who've been with rapid rehousing programs the longest are really feel fulfilled and satisfied by the fact that they're helping people to get a fresh start. Sometimes they just become such converts that they can't wait to bring other landlords into the program as well.
Thank you. I'm not sure who should address this, but the question is, should providers use rapid rehousing to serve people with high barriers, such as eviction history or drug and alcohol use?
Oh, let me answer that one. Yeah, I used to run a rapid rehousing program in Hennepin County that started in 1993. And for quite a few years, we screened out people with the highest tenant screening barriers because we thought we could only provide services for 6 months, and we thought that they would have to need more than that to be able to succeed. So if they had more than 4 evictions, if they had a felony that involved drugs or significant property damage, if they had court judgments for unpaid rent to other landlords, we screened them out because we thought we can't handle this. These people obviously need more than we can provide. And we did that for quite a long time, and we were getting fantastic outcomes. Something like 95% of clients were not going back into shelter within a year of leaving shelter. So we thought we'd nailed that. But then all the shelters filled during the recession, and we were going to have to turn away families with children. So we made the decision to try to provide the same exact 6 months of services to people with these very, very high barriers. And to our shock, their outcomes were almost as good. Instead of 95%, it was 88 to 92%. And so for years, we have been screening people out that could have done perfectly well with rapid rehousing. So I really don't advise screening people out on the basis of barriers. We did that. It was a mistake. It's not necessary.
Yeah, and this is Cynthia. I wanted to say that we've been doing, at the Alliance, we've been doing focus groups with consumers who've been rapidly rehoused and exited the program to see how they're doing after rapid rehousing ends. And it's been really interesting to hear the consumer perspective, because even consumers who were experiencing very high barriers, such as drug and alcohol use, eviction histories, criminal histories, no income, may themselves have felt that they weren't sure that they were going to be okay with rapid rehousing assistance, and after exiting the program, and some people who, having been out for months or a year, finding that they even surprised themselves that they really just they are succeeding, they're making it. It's not that they don't have challenges, but that time and time again we hear that housing is the thing that really helped them respond to those higher challenges, and they couldn't really do that without housing. Certainly things like drug and alcohol use and dealing with health issues and increasing income, housing is a foundation for really achieving those things. And without housing, it's really hard. I also think that, just reiterating what Marge said about outcomes being the same for people who have different barriers, low barriers to high barriers, I think the SSVF, Supportive Services for Veteran Families data that we have on thousands of households is showing that people who come in with 0 income are able to exit the program successfully and stay in housing for up to a year, up to 2 years, is what we have sort of data for, even though they came in with 0 income, and they're sort of exiting at a very close rate to those who came in with income. So again, sort of reiterating that the barriers, the program really is meant to help people with high barriers as well.
I would just add one other thought here, if I could, just that the relationship between targeting and program design, and this really can't be overstated, but programs that are taking in households with greater barriers, no income, other personal issues going on that might impact their housing, have to be ready to offer the most assistance possible where it's evidently needed and desired by the participant. Meaning, if need be, programs have to be ready to pay all the rent, perhaps for most of the duration of the program, and you might need to have to provide more frequent home visits and more intensive assistance, perhaps by more seasoned staff. Programs have to be ready to do that. But I also want to just stress that oftentimes households that appear to have the greatest barriers at entry may in fact be the easiest households to work with. And households who may appear to have the lowest barriers to entry may have the most challenges and require the most assistance if so desired. So again, we need to have these programs. Programs have to be ready to offer the most and start with the least.
I think that
I'd like to. I'd like to also add that one of the things that I've seen in rapid rehousing programs is that staff think that the people that they're sitting across the table from, that a very high percentage of them have some kind of a mental health problem. And it's true that the person sitting there may also be worried about the very same thing, because what has happened to them is they've been under extreme stress overload, sometimes for many months. And they've developed a lot of symptoms of stress overload that can look like a mental illness. It can actually even be a little frightening to the person experiencing it. They may be more aggressive, they may be more vulnerable, they may almost be paralyzed. And all of this is something that can appear like a mental illness, and staff can start to think, oh, I don't think that we can provide enough help. But in fact, these are the folks that need housing the most, because that stress cannot start to subside until they have a safe place to live.
And thank you for that emphasis, Marge. I wanted to say that as having worked with many case managers and been a case manager myself, I think we learn that we can't predict who's going to be successful. I think we want to be able to do that, and we think that we can, especially if we've seen many households of a similar type. But that thinking that we can predict who's going to be successful is something that we want to be able to put aside and really try to sort of have faith that every household is going to be successful and doing whatever we can to get them there. And that really is kind of one of the essential principles of providing effective rapid rehousing.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question. If the client is non-compliant with the housing stability plan that they agreed to, or if they're non-compliant with landlord rules and is required to leave, should assistance be discontinued or denied for these reasons? How should we address these situations?
Well, I'd say if people are not quote-unquote complying with the plan, you might want to sit down and rethink the plan. Perhaps the plan was too ambitious. The person might have thought they could do all of those actions, but when you're under severe stress, it impacts a lot of your executive functions, such as short-term memory and ability to anticipate the consequences of behaviors and plan ahead. So it may be that you just need to simplify the plan. It may be that the plan no longer reflects what the person really wants. I say if there's a problem with following through on the plan, start with redoing the plan. Now, if it gets to the point where a landlord is considering that the person may have to leave, we have to try, first of all, to deal with all the problems that are causing the landlord to think that they might want to evict. Sometimes people really don't understand their lease. They think that they can move anybody into their apartment. It's their apartment. They can't keep control of their children, and they're kind of raising hell in the building. So sometimes it's just a question of sitting down and talking over with people what is expected in the lease and how can we arrange things so that you can comply with that. But if people do have to leave, well, unless they can find housing on their own, I would suggest that you try to help them find other housing. And sometimes it could just be a mismatch between the landlord style and your client's manner of operating. It could be it's just a bad match, that you've got a landlord who just has no patience for the exact kinds of problems that this person has, and another landlord might be much more tolerant. So yes, I would say help them find another place to live.
Thanks, Marge. We're getting close to the end of the webinar, so I just wanted to point out some resources that we'll be sending out these slides after the webinar concludes, but we have the Rapid Rehousing Performance Benchmarks and Standards posted on our website. We have a Rapid Rehousing Know-How series that is it's an effort that the Alliance has put together to provide information to new providers, and then also a summary of history and core components of rapid rehousing. And then, as I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, we have 3 additional webinars coming up. The next one is on May 25th, which will focus on housing identification. Then on June 9th, we will deal with the second core component, rent and move-in assistance, and then on June 23rd, rapid rehousing, case management, and services. And we'll be sending out these links after the webinar concludes. Thank you so much to all the presenters, and we hope you will join us for the next webinar. Thank you.